Hey everybody, we're going to talk about pleating today. We're not going to be sewing, we're just going to be assembling. So I'm going to explain to you how I calculate my pleating, and if this is a good tool for you, you're more than welcome to use this. Otherwise, a lot of people come up with their own ideas, but this is how I do it. So first of all, I measure my completed bodice. Make sure you don't go down too low because this is going to be in the seam allowance and that might change the number a little bit. So I measure to the halfway point, which is 18.5 inches. I always measure both sides because you never know if one side is going to be slightly bigger than the other's 37 inches, so that's great. And then I go ahead and measure my skirt. So in this case, my skirt was 84. Each half was 84. And here's my calculations for you. So my bodice was 18.5 by 18.5, the two halves. And then the skirt was 84 by 84. And then a quarter was a 9 1/4 and 42, and an eighth was 21 and 4 1/4. So I'm going to use this number right here, 21. So I've measured 21 inches on my skirt fabric right here. So I've got my 21 inches measured. I'm just marking it with a pin. I'm going from the center back seam. I'm going to make an inverted box pleat right here, and I'm going to go 3 inches is going to be my first pleat, and then I'm going to just go 1.5 inches between. I'm just picking kind of a random number, and I'm going to just see how it looks. I might do it a couple times until I get it right, but this right here, this 21 inches needs to come down to 4.5 inches. Okay, so I've marked all along in here. Each pleat is 3 inches. They're 1.5 inches apart, like so. And then I'm always going to go towards the center back. You're always going to make your pleats go towards the center back. So my first pleat is going to go from this 3-inch mark to the center back, and then I'm going to have 1.5 inches between, and then this 3-inch pleat is going to go to this right here. So when I make my pleat, I'm just going to pinch at my 3-inch mark. I'm going to squeeze it between my fingers, and then I'm just going to pull it over to my next pin there. When I have all my numbers figured out, I'm going to mark each place with chalk because that's a lot easier way to mark it rather than the pins. But just because I'm practicing, I'm going to just do it this way. And so I go ahead and clip it just to hold it into place because I'm just practicing. So then I grab my next pleat, my 3-inch pleat here, and I squeeze it over and I lay it on top of my pin. And then I grab a clip and I clip it into place. And I keep doing this until I get to my 21-inch point, or whatever your point is that you're working with. It's different every time you make a garment because each time you might use a different size skirt measurement. And then I'm always going to just check and see how I'm doing and see if each of my pleats is 1.5 inches. So then I'm marking and then pinching and then marking. Okay, so I have made my pleats to the 21-inch mark right here, and I'm measuring to see how close I am on my first try. So my measurement is supposed to be 4.5 inches, but in this case, it is 6 inches. So it's 1.5 inches too big. So I need to change something. Either I need to make my pleats smaller, or I need to make the pleat bigger. So what I'm going to do on this one, since I have so much fabric, is I'm going to make each pleat to be 1.5 inches apart instead of 1.5 inches apart. I'm going to make each pleat to be 1 inch apart. Okay, this time when I made the pleats, I made them 1 inch apart. I kept the 3-inch pleat, but now I'm just going to put them closer together. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark or measure and see if I am closer. The yellow pin, which I know is hard to tell, but there's the yellow pin. So now I'm right super close to my 4.5-inch measurement. So now I know that I'm right on. So now what I'm going to do, rather than mark it with pins, I'm going to mark it with chalk. I'm going to mark each pleat 3 inches, and the spacing between each pleat is going to be 1 inch apart. The center back is going to look like this, where each pleat comes together, and in my case it's right over the seam in the back. And it's going to look just like that. So the pleats on this side of the skirt are going to go towards the center. The pleats on this side of the skirt are going to go towards the center from this side. And that's how you get started. So now that I know my formula is 3-inch pleats and each of them are 1 inch apart, I'm going to go ahead and mark each one 3 inches, 1.5, 3 inches, 1.5. And I'm going to just go all the way down because I already know what my formula is. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to pin each pleat. Now I've taken out my clips and I now have each pleat is held down by 2 pins. I like to do 2 pins because as I'm sewing, when I get ready to sew my pleats, I'm going to take the top pin out, but then I've still got the bottom one holding it in place in case it starts to move around or anything. And so that way it's holding it nice and straight and flat. And so I'm just going to pin all my pleats as I go. I'm just going to fold each one over where it's supposed to go. And then I'm going to have my little measuring stick here and then make sure that each pleat is 1 inch apart. I'm just lifting up and pinching at the 3-inch mark and folding it over to the 1-inch mark, making sure that my pleat is 1 inch. If I need to adjust it a little bit, I will. And then I'm just pinning it at the top. And then another pin a little bit lower to keep it in place. And then I'm just going to continue doing that. I'm grabbing it at the 3-inch mark, I'm pinching it and laying it over on the 1-inch mark. Then I'm measuring to make sure that my pleats are 1 inch apart, and then I'm pinning it. And I'm just going to continue that way all the way until the end. One thing I'd like to mention is that because fabric has a lot of give, even though your numbers may be correct in what you have been figuring out, sometimes when you're making the pleats, it doesn't quite fit because fabric gives. It stretches, and so you might be pulling it a little firmly as you're going along, and sometimes that creates a problem at the end, and that is that you have a little bit too much at the end. So that's what happened with this, because I ended up having so much fabric here that there were small errors along the way, and that added up to about 1 inch. So what I ended up doing with this skirt was making the pleats 1 inch apart, and then each pleat was 4 inches, because this fabric just kept stretching and pulling. And so I did have to make a few modifications as I moved along. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure each half of my skirt, and I'm going to see if I am close to what my numbers were. And so our numbers were 18.5, and so I'm just going to measure that and see if the width of each half is 18.5. So I've measured the other side, and it is also very close to 18.5. And one thing about this process is that I'm saying that it's 18.5, but once I sew that on there, I might have some give in my fabric. That's always a problem with fabric, because fabric gives. It's not like rock or stone where it's like that's the measurement. But on fabric, you do end to have some stretching. And so what I'm going to do is I will sew all the way down to the end to right about these last two pleats right here. And then once I get to that, then I'm going to measure again and make sure that my numbers are correct, because there might have been a little bit of stretching. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my bodice up to my skirt and see how close I got on that part. Okay, so I've put my bodice edge on my skirt edge, and I'm just checking to see how I'm doing, and I'm very, very close. Here's the center of the bodice, and then here is the center of the skirt. So now I'm going to just go ahead and stitch 2 stitch marks right here across the top of my skirt, 1¼ of an inch and 1½ an inch. I want to stay under the 5/8 mark, because that is where my top is going to be sewed to my skirt. So when I start to sew, I always start from the center back, just because I want my stitching to end at the front. And so I'm just going to start stitching right here in the center. I want to make sure that this right here, where these two pieces meet, the back two pieces meet, are flush, because then you're going to get a really pretty line down the center back. So as I'm going along and I'm doing my stitching, a lot of times it looks really good on the front, and then I double check. I always double check to make sure how it looks on the back, so nothing is doubled over. And so sometimes you have things that happen right here where it flips over, and you really don't want that, because then that's just an extra layer of fabric that is creating bulk for the skirt. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out and then re-stitch it. I'm going to measure and see how close I got before I go ahead and pin everything on, because I just want to make sure that all my measurements are correct. And the skirt is a little bit bigger than the bodice, but I really prefer that, because it's a lot easier to make this pleat smaller than to try and modify it the other way. So I'm really happy with that. And so I will go ahead and take it in a little bit, but I'm not really worried about it, because I can fix it at the very end. But it is so close at this point that I'm just going to leave it. And then, so what I'm going to do next is I am going to pin the bodice piece to the skirt. Okay, at this point, we're actually going to deviate from the Nordic pattern. If you are following along with your pattern, this is the point where I do something different. And I'm going to just show you really quickly the reason why. So the way the pattern has you do it, it has you sew the bodice piece to the skirt piece like this. So you have your seam running, you put your two pieces together, and then you run your seam along here, and then basically that is finished. So this is basically what the inside looks like. You have this rod showing. And if you want to do it that way, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to show you how to do it an alternative way, so that you have a smoother seam, and it looks nicer. If you're not going to be doing any modifications to your dress, this is a great way to do it. If you think you're going to be making modifications to your dress, if you're going to be letting it out or taking it in or doing other things like that, then this way is perfectly acceptable. But I'm going to show you how to do it this way, and I'm going to show you what it looks like as a finished project. This dress I did with the method that I'm going to show you now. So this is what the inside looks. It's just a flat, clean seam on the inside, and then on the outside, it's a flat, clean seam on the outside. Whereas this one, you can see the seam, you can see all the raw edges on the outside, but on the inside, it's nice and flat and smooth. And so that is the difference between those two techniques. So what we're going to do at this point is we are going to turn our dress inside out. So we're working from the wrong side of the skirt. So here's my center back. My center back pleat is here. And here is the center back of my bodice. So I have the inside, the correct right side of the lining with the wrong side of the skirt, and I'm just going to pin those right along this seam line here. I got so excited to show you the pinning of the skirt to the bodice that I forgot one step, and that step is to make sure that my top is completely ready to go. So I always fold it in half and put it one on top of each other and make sure that both of the pieces are the same. And then I also check and see if I need to do any trimming, which I do. I need to trim a little bit right here. And then I'm just going to take my iron and I'm going to fold this piece up just like so, but I'm going to have to rip a little bit of this seam before I can do that. So I've trimmed my lining so that it's flush with my bodice piece, and now I'm going to fold under my top outer piece about 5/8 of an inch, because I am going to do a 5/8 inch seam on my attaching the skirt to the bodice. So I'm going to just go all the way across, and I'm going to just press down and measure and press down. And then when I get to the end, where the end piece is, I'm going to measure and make sure both of my pieces are equal once I get my two pieces folded down, just to make sure that everything looks good. Okay, so now I have my edges pressed down, and I'm just going to measure and make sure that both pieces are the same length. And it's just easiest for me to do it this way. You can measure, but you get the same result. If you watch my other video about putting the bodice together, you recall that I said don't sew too far down on this seam, because you always end up taking it out. And so I'm always having to cut these little stitches because I don't have quite enough room to fold under my bodice piece. Okay, I'm going to double check and see if my two side bodice pieces are even, and saying 8 1/4 on this side. And let's see how it looks on this side over here. And then I'm just going to measure it, and where my piece is over here. Of course, it's not going to cooperate with me. Okay, we're right at 8 1/4, just a little bit over on that side. 8 1/4 and like a couple lines there. Yep, okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so now I have the bodice pinned to the skirt, and I'm ready to sew, but I just wanted to show you one thing, that even though we measured several times, we're still off by a little bit. I don't know what happened, if something popped out, or but I'm going to go ahead and leave it and just wait until the end. And then once I get to that point, I'll decide if I want to go ahead and modify this, because the lining might stretch a little bit, and I won't actually know until I get to the end. So this is what it's going to look like. I've got my lining piece is on the top and my skirt is on the bottom. I've got the bodice piece pulled back out of the way, and then I'm just gonna sew right down the seam here. So I've got it all sewed together all the way around. I still have a lot of my pins in there just to hold everything steady, and so at this point I'm ready to turn it inside out so that I can top stitch along the edge, because it's still totally inside out, and we'll find out how we did with the pleats. Okay, this is what it looks like at this point. So this is the outside. This is all the pleating. Here's the center back. And this is where we sewed our seam here. So now I've got my bodice piece here. And as you can see, here's my little press line that I made. So now, once that is ready to go, I am going to pull this down and continue to fold it under, and then I'm going to pin this bodice piece to the skirt in preparation for my top stitching. Okay, I'm pinning the bodice to the skirt now, just making sure that I'm covering my stitching line underneath and that it's nice and flat and smooth all the way down. I've worked my way around to the front and everything is looking nice and flat and smooth. I always seem to have one really good side that turns out really awesome, and then I move to the other side and it's a problem. So I'm showing you this because everyone's like, you do such a good job, all your dresses turn out really well, but it doesn't always work out great. Sometimes you have an issue, and right here my issue is that for some reason this is dipping down right here, and so I'm having to pull it up in order to make it be flat and smooth, because it's stitched down a little bit when I came across the front here. And so I'm really having to maneuver this around to get it to lay flat and smooth. I think I've got it now, but I'm going to have to measure and see if my two front pieces are equal at this point. Okay, it looks like this side is 8.5. Really super close. And then let's see on this side. This side is also 8.5. I always measure because sometimes they don't come out right. I'm not really sure what happens, but I always make sure, because sometimes one side is a little bit longer than the other. It looks like this side is a little bit longer to me, but if it is, it's only by like 1/10 of an inch. So now I'm gonna go ahead and top stitch all along this edge right here, and I like to get it pretty close to the edge, as close as I can get it, just like this side here. As I am sewing, I am smoothing down my pleats, and I'm giving firm pressure on the bodice. You don't want to tug too hard, but at the same time, you want to make sure that everything is smooth and flat on this part. The top is completely top stitched to the skirt now, and it's all ready to go and just waiting to connect the shoulder straps.